feel really dumb saying this, but when I first watched this episode, so the Doctor says at the very end, once he's defeated the clockwork robots, he says an expression. He says, "I'm not winding you up," and I didn't realize what that meant. I guess maybe I just lived my whole life up to that point not knowing that was an expression.
That's kind of it's more UK than US, I think.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought.
So it's a pun.
Well, I know it's a pun, but at the time I didn't know it was a pun. And I thought he was just stating a fact, like, someone's got to wind you up, buddy, and I'm not doing it. And it sounds much better as a pun. Like, I like it more now than I did when I first saw this episode.
Yeah, because he means it in both the literal and figurative sense.
Right. I thought he was just being practical at the time. But now I see he was working for a pun. I also, I also had a similar issue when in The Fires of Pompeii, when he talks about them getting in a lava, which was supposed to be, I guess, a pun on getting in a lather, which I also didn't know was an expression. So I was doubly confused because he wasn't even using the right word. He was using a word that sounded like it, and so I was just really confused with that.
It's very confusing.
But in any case, I'm better now. I get these things now, and I feel better about myself.
Well, that's good.
I know.
Isn't that what Doctor Who is all about?
I think so.
I'm Tom Dickinson.
And I'm Louis Midas.
And this is The Cloister Room,
a podcast about Doctor Who and other things.
The girl in the fireplace.
Yes, that girl in that fireplace.
How did you like it?
I really liked it.
I liked it too.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously I'd seen this episode before. So, I knew what to expect going in. And I knew that I'd liked it when I first saw it. And I guess I liked it on subsequent viewings too, because I've definitely watched this episode more than once. And I still really like it. I still think it holds up. It's still an interesting episode. I like the plot. I enjoy it. I like sort of how everything sort of plays out, and how the sort of mystery of this derelict spaceship plays out over time, and it's just nifty.
I think by this point I've probably seen it too many times that it's not as charming to me as it once was.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this a lot.
Oh yeah.
Because before Series 3, this would have been my go-to one single episode to show people. Which is kind of strange because it's kind of a weird episode.
It is a weird episode. Well, it involves a lot of time travel, but not a lot of it is in the TARDIS.
Right, that's one thing that makes it kind of weird.
Right, it's actually, there are actually two time travel machines, in a sense, in this episode, but only one of them is ever really used for a majority of the episode. Mm-hmm. They even have an explanation for why they can't use the other one, however much sense that makes, that they are a part of events. Which I feel like that's kind of like a throwaway explanation you can sort of play fast and loose with if you want. And I mean, I guess it just, for this episode, it is used as an excuse to not use the other time machine.
Right.
And I mean, yeah, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah. Back when I was first exposing my friend Chris Harcourt to Doctor Who, my friend and occasional video co-collaborator, I was showing him Series 2, and we were going in order, and then Love and Monsters came on, and his brother wandered into the room and just sat down, and it was the first Doctor Who he had ever seen.
Oh, God.
And so he watched the whole episode, and then when it was over, he's like, Tom, I know you're really into this show, but that has to be the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And, I'm actually kind of a fan of Love and Monsters, but I had to admit that it is possibly the worst first episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So the immediate palate cleanser I had to turn to was this. I was like, well, I have to find some way to like rehabilitate Doctor Who in this guy's imagination. So I picked the one that could possibly undo what that had done, and it was this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that, and that's kind of funny because when you're talking about before series 3, because obviously after series 3 the go-to episode is Blink, which is funny because it's also a Stephen Moffat episode.
Yeah, and it also has, but I mean, some people would argue against that because it doesn't have a lot of the Doctor in it.
Yeah, that is the one thing that I would argue against it for. It doesn't really introduce you to, it introduces you to the show, but it doesn't really introduce you to the character of the Doctor. So
yes, so even then I was still occasionally using this one.
Yeah, and it's good for that. I think that is very good.
It's kind of interesting in retrospect just how much this is like the prototypical Moffat episode.
Right.
Even more than The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances. Yeah. Like, this is the one that has most of the ideas that Moffat would want to use in his era are kind of introduced here.
Yeah, that's true.
And recycled later.
Right. Yeah, especially, with the whole having an imaginary friend who's the Doctor when you're little and then he reappears when you grow up. That's a pretty big one. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, you could actually, I mean, like, it definitely, it was about to work here, in this episode before Renette went and died. She was about to become a companion, or so it would seem. And, I'm a little disappointed that they didn't take Renette with them. I mean, obviously they couldn't. I mean, like, that wouldn't work in the arc of the season. But, I mean,
Well, it's funny because I don't think this episode does work in the arc of the season. It doesn't anyway.
Well, that's fair.
Because the previous episode, School Reunion, ends with, Mickey wanting to come along in the TARDIS and Rose being not at all pleased about this. Because they're kind of in the middle of setting up this sort of grand season-long love story between the Doctor and Rose.
Right.
Which, in this episode, is completely dropped, basically. It's ignored. And one of the big ideas in School Reunion is the notion that, Rose sees this other companion who, the Doctor has moved on from. And she's like, well, maybe I'm not the only girl who's ever been in his life. But then all of a sudden in this episode, she's, like I said, she's just kind of, that whole plot thread is dropped in favor of like a story between the Doctor and an entirely different woman. And it's just kind of strange how it doesn't sort of fit in with the stuff that's around it.
Huh, that's interesting. Because I completely forgot what episode came before this. And it's actually probably been a very long time since I've seen School Reunion. Because I don't think while this is an episode that I've watched a lot, I don't think I've watched School Reunion all that much. And I don't know if there's really a valid reason why I haven't. I guess I just haven't. But yeah, that's interesting because there is a bit of dialogue, I think, in this episode where it is Rose and Mickey by themselves, and and Mickey's kind of reminding Rose of, the times the Doctor has talked about other women or something like that. Something to that effect where he talks about, he actually brings up Cleopatra. So I guess in a sense that has that same sort of thought, although that's just like a very small fragment of the episode where that's sort of brought up. But yeah.
I think one of the reasons it doesn't necessarily fit entirely well is because Moffat didn't want to know what was happening in other episodes because he didn't want them spoiled. and RTD, he didn't rewrite Moffat's episodes like he rewrote everyone else's episodes.
Okay.
So basically, this was sort of produced in its own little bubble, and that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think.
Well,
like for instance, in Forest of the Dead, way in the future in Series 4, or maybe it was in Silence of the Library, I don't remember, but there's like an oblique reference to the fact that something horrible is going to happen to Donna.
Right.
And Moffat wrote that having no idea how Series 4 was going to end. He just, RTD said, hey, can you throw in a reference to the fact that something horrible is going to happen to Donna? And then Moffat's like, okay, but don't tell me what.
That's a very interesting way to write a TV show, I guess. Yeah, I don't know if you can avoid spoilers on a show you're working on. Was the intention that they wouldn't know what happened until they saw the episode air?
Well, I think from RTD's perspective, it was like he didn't avoid this episode entirely. I mean, I'm sure he, helped work on the production side of this episode, but I guess he didn't want to know until the script was turned in. And my impression is that Moffat didn't know anything until the series aired.
Well, it's a good way to keep secrets, I guess. I guess that does lead to problems like having an episode that doesn't fit into the overall story arc. And I mean, like, I guess when your overall story arc sort of involves just like a returning villain or something, then it's not really important that every episode sort of fit into that arc. Like, I mean, there's a lot of what happens in series 1 through 4 is that there's kind of this hint that there's this big villain that's going to rear its ugly head at the end. But when you have an arc with characters, that doesn't quite work as well. Like, obviously there's Rose's story, and that's obviously not, I mean, you expect her to be in a certain place mentally, and so yeah, when she's not there in this episode, that kind of throws things off a bit.
Yeah, it's kind of funny though, because in School Reunion, Mickey's not happy because he feels like the doctor, he feels like Rose is paying too much attention to the doctor and not enough to him. And then in Rise of the Cybermen, actually, his main issue seems like he's jealous that the doctor is paying too much attention to Rose and not enough to him. Like in that episode, he feels like he's not part of the group, and that the doctor's like, he's not the main companion. Rose is the main companion. He's kind of a marginalized. He's not important. But in this episode, everyone's just fine.
Yeah, that's true. It could be that somewhere. Are they wearing the same clothes that they were wearing at the end of School Reunion?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. So we don't know. Maybe there was an adventure that happened where they sort of reconciled their differences temporarily, and then this was like the good period where Mickey's feeling more optimistic about his relationship with Rose, and Rose is not jealous anymore or something, and then they're in this good place, and then something changes between now and Rise of the Cybermen, and then it's, that's what happens.
I think we need multiple seasons of Big Finish audios to really get this to work.
Yeah, I think so. That's the only solution. Once Big Finish finally gets a hold of the rights to the new series, maybe this will give them plenty of fuel to write entire arcs out of. All they'd have to do is just have one season of the audios end with them saying like, oh, let's go to a spaceship or something, and then the next season will start with like, wow, that was a really interesting spaceship, and then there they go. They've managed to cover both bookends of what happened before and what happened after. It's kind of funny because I really do like this episode, and I realize it exists in a bubble, but it's kind of a good bubble, and I like it. I don't know. I hate saying this, I really do, but I like it when Stephen Moffat is restricted to one episode.
Well, yeah, because he's putting all his eggs in one basket. He's giving all of his best material to one episode, trying to focus on a really strong story. And I feel like this episode really does have like all of the ideas he wanted to do about Doctor Who. Mm-hmm. And pretty much everything that comes after it is just sort of riffing on ideas that are introduced here. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because there's nothing wrong with riffing,
right?
But it's this is such a singular sort of complex little unit of story that stands so well on its own. Maybe it doesn't fit in very well with other stuff, but you can just watch it and enjoy it, and it does everything that's required of it. And there's pretty much nothing in here that makes no sense in the way that some Moffat stuff makes no sense. Right.
Yeah, because there are episodes, especially. Well, yeah. Once Stephen Moffat took over, there are moments where you just sort of have to, accept what's happening and sort of figure it out for yourself later, like why this might make sense. And that's a fine way to do things. But it is. Yeah, this is solid in the sense that everything makes sense and everything follows. Like even right down to. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that if if he broke one of, like, I mean, not that any of this makes sense, but I mean, it makes sense if he broke one of the time windows. Yeah, okay, all of the time windows would be broken. Sure, I can see that. And then yeah, of course, if there's one that just happens to not be connected when the breaking event happens, then yeah, if you reconnected it would probably still work. Like, I mean, like, even that, which, I mean, it doesn't really have any basis in reality, I guess, but it still makes sense. It's still working off of its own internal logic.
Yeah, it's like, kind of, if you want to see the opposite of that, you can take the crack in time, which is kind of almost a similar idea. Mm-hmm. In fact, in a lot of ways, is very similar, especially in how it's introduced.
Yeah.
But the whole idea behind Series 5 is, at the very end, is like, well, it's all better now. It's completely tied up. There are no more cracks in time. We rebooted the universe, so there aren't any more. And then in Time of the Doctor, it's, well, there's some scar tissue because there just is. Yeah, there just is. Deal with it. Even though a huge deal was made about completely resolving the cracks in time. But
right. And here they never change any of those rules, and everything that's introduced is it's, I don't know, it's still, everything is upheld. Like, all the rules introduced are upheld. And it's just nice to see.
Yeah, and I mean it's for a very good reason that there's that one that still works.
Yeah.
It's completely explained, so you don't need to like have Moffat say later in an interview, like, oh, you guys are dumb, you didn't get this. Let me explain it.
Right, yeah, and yeah, so yeah, maybe instead of reintroducing the cracks, he should have reintroduced the fireplace in Time of the Doctor, and have that be like the Time Lords figured out how to connect a spaceship to Trenzalore. I don't know.
Well, apparently the fireplace was real.
What do you mean?
There was actually a rotating fireplace.
Oh,
in Versailles.
Ah, so that was a. Did it actually lead to a spaceship?
I can only presume that it did. I cannot confirm that, but I assume it must have. Where else would it go?
I can't imagine. It wouldn't even make sense. I mean, why would you even have a rotating fireplace if it wasn't going to go to a spaceship? So I wonder if that. Well, I'm assuming it wasn't coincidence. I'm assuming that Stephen Moffat used that as inspiration.
Yeah, I believe so.
I mean, it would make sense.
Yeah, I think when this episode was sort of first conceived, it was basically Russell T Davies gave him his assignment, which was, there were two elements he had to include. One was Madame de Pompadour, and one was clockwork robots. Because Russell T Davies just liked Madame de Pompadour and had apparently read some stuff about her while writing Casanova. So he was like, hey, just use this. And then he had also apparently heard something about the Mechanical Turk, which was an alleged chess-playing automaton that worked on clockwork, I guess. And so he gave that stuff to Moffat and said, just write something about it.
That's interesting. Was that like a bet or something? Like, did Stephen Moffat tell Russell T Davies he wanted writing an episode wasn't easy enough? He needed to random.
Well, no, I think most of the writers, when they're commissioned, are given a couple of ideas they're supposed to sort of structure the script around.
I guess that makes sense.
Most of the ideas in Doctor Who kind of originate from the top and then are handed off to the writers, and the writers develop them and take them into like a completely different direction. Because I mean, like, if you look at this episode, the fact that it has Madame de Pompadour in it and the fact that it has clockwork robots in it, I mean, doesn't really tell you all there is to know about the story. Like, most of what's interesting about the story has to do with the way time travel is used and the way you have, France and a spaceship kind of juxtaposed against one another. And
yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, it's kind of funny because the clockwork robots are kind of low tech in a sense, and I guess that's because they were just using spare parts and stuff, or in the logic of the story, it's justified by the fact that they were working off of spare parts. But it's, if time travel wasn't involved, it would make more sense to have clockwork robots, because that would be what was available at that period in France. Mm-hmm. But there's no reason why you couldn't say like, oh well, there's the story itself, the story that involves a time traveling spaceship connecting to parts of an 18th century French woman's life, that doesn't necessitate clockwork robots at all. I mean, you could have just normal, whatever sci-fi robots you want. You don't need to make them clockwork.
Right.
So, now I'm trying to wonder if it would be a stronger story with just regular robots.
I don't know. I like the clockwork robots.
No, I like them too. It's just, yeah, and I think to the extent that they do make sense. I mean, that they're working off of spare parts. That's fine.
One thing that's kind of interesting is that they never figure out one of the central mysteries.
Well, yeah, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's something that I don't think happens all that often in Doctor Who, where like something is revealed, like a big mystery is revealed to the audience, but not to the characters.
Well, and they just kind of shrug it off too. They're just like, well, I guess we'll never know. And they get in the TARDIS, and then that's when it is revealed. And that's kind of that's a neat thing, and I think that's. Yeah, and well, because it's a mystery that is completely unimportant to sort of overcoming the conflict of the story. It's not at all necessary that they know why they want Renette, because all they need to know is that these robots are trying to get Renette and they got to stop it, and so that is good enough, I suppose. Like they know that they need her at a certain age, and I mean that sort of helps them narrow things down a bit. But I mean, they don't need to know why. Like that's unimportant to them. But then to us, the audience, we would be, if that was not revealed, then we would be wondering why that was even a thing. Like, why was that so important? And the thing is, even that is a very clever kind of twist, because it also follows a sort of strange internal logic, because they were using, the robots were using parts of the crew to rebuild the ship, and so the one part that they need is the control system or whatever. And in their own twisted logic, they think that because they're already, I mean, I'm assuming because they were just following along that same wavelength of using organic parts, they figured they figured they needed the actual namesake for the ship, which is it's kind of a cool, and it follows that same logic, even though it doesn't, in retrospect, I mean, if the robots were really using their heads, they could have figured out they could just punch a hole in time space to go get the part they needed. Mm-hmm. But I mean, and that's the kind of thing that would occur to a human. But when you're leaving it up to these robots to do it, it's sort of, you can sort of wave that away and say, well, they're robots. What do they know? And so even that follows its own logic, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like at a lot of the time during the episode, you kind of forget to wonder about why they've made the decisions they've made.
Right.
And so like sort of the ending of the episode after the climax with like all of the, wrapping everything up, it kind of struck me how long and slow a lot of that stuff was compared to what you might see in a much faster paced episode like the ones we tend to get now.
Yeah.
But like the episode just sort of like glides gently to a conclusion, and then like all of a sudden at the very end you suddenly get this, piece of information that you might not even have didn't realize you were still wondering about this, but now here it is, and it sort of fits into everything if you've been paying attention.
Yeah.
And so it's just a very satisfying like note to end on, even if the Doctor doesn't get that.
Yeah, that's really funny, because it does seem like this is something that we haven't gotten in a very long time, is that sort of nice pacing where you're on this sort of action adventure roller coaster, and then you're sort of brought back down, to a calm level, and it's sort of just this gentle. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's so much better than if the Doctor had, burst through the glass on his horse and beat the robots, and then he instantly disappeared into the TARDIS, and then like that was how the episode ended. That'd be terrible.
Yeah. It's one of those things that you really can't rush.
Yeah.
And so a story that works quite like this one probably isn't something they'd do with the way the show is currently made. which is kind of sad. It also feels kind of weird to say about a new Who episode because this doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
Right.
But the show has still come kind of a long way since this.
Yeah, that's true because it's weird to think about that this was one of the first episodes of series 2. It wasn't the very first, but
It's the 4th, right?
I think so.
New Earth, and then Tooth and Claw, then School Reunion, then this.
Yeah. So I guess not really. It's in the top third. We'll say.
Yeah.
But yeah. So this was very early on, but before a lot of stuff started happening.
Yeah, because when you think of series 2, you think of the arc involving the Cybermen. Mm-hmm. And there's that big Cybermen 2-parter that's right there in the middle. So this is very distinctly sort of in the earlier part before that Cybermen arc starts to kick in.
Yeah, and it really doesn't. It kind of is never the same after that. It's because right now we're still, it's still the Doctor and Rose, and then there's Mickey too. But there haven't really been that many. I don't know. I guess I want to say consequences. Everything seems kind of fun and happy. That there's a sense of danger, but Rose is still there. She's fine. The Doctor is regenerated, but he's fine for the most part. And there's nothing. Obviously there are stakes, but it's just not. You don't get that sense of damage. I guess I don't know. And I don't know. It's just weird. This is like the fun times before things get serious.
How do you think this episode would have worked with Christopher Eccleston?
Ooh,
because I imagine I don't know what was happening when. I don't really know timelines here, but at some point, when Moffat was working on this episode, he probably thought it was Christopher Eccleston who was going to be in it.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know, because, it's funny because, there are definitely parts where David Tennant is acting kind of goofy, like when he's pretending to be drunk and stuff. There's all that stuff. And, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it would have been different with Christopher Eccleston. Like, would he have pretended to be drunk and have a tie on his head?
Yeah, I don't know. And I mean, the Tennant Doctor is much more, emotionally involved, and like for instance, in the sort of ending part of the episode where he's very sad but isn't saying anything. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to imagine how Eccleston would have worked with material like that.
Well, yeah,
like would it might have been there might have been like a lot more sort of angry bitterness to his attitude, whereas Tennant has this, I don't know, there's this side of the Doctor that I think we see here for probably the first time, where Tennant is sort of this, really sad guy who it comes to be sort of a major part of his character.
Yeah, and that's kind of a thing for him is this is kind of the start of him losing people, and it's from down here he's gonna lose Rose, later he'll lose Donna, the master, yeah, so this is the start of that, yeah. And I actually kind of find it difficult to picture this episode with Christopher Eccleston. I don't know what he would have done.
Yeah, I imagine by the time Moffat was working on the final draft of the script, he probably knew, obviously he knew, okay, Mickey's going to be in this episode. Mm-hmm. The companion is still Rose, and we got this new Doctor. And he probably spent some time working on that based on what he'd seen in the Christmas Invasion. Although, I don't know, maybe not, because I don't know whether this might have been written before the Christmas Invasion was even filmed.
Huh, yeah.
I just don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they could have changed elements and stuff and dialogue as necessary to fit David Tennant as opposed to Christopher Eccleston if they had to.
But yeah, it's sort of generally just true throughout the history of Doctor Who that most of the scripts for a new Doctor's first few stories were written for the previous Doctor.
Right.
Because the scripts are being worked on before they know that they're losing the star in most cases.
Yeah. So you think there would have been just as much making out in this episode if it had been Christopher Eccleston?
There was making out in season 1.
Was there really?
Well, the Doctor in the last episode of series 1, the Doctor kisses both Rose and Jack.
Oh, that's right. Wow, I completely forgot about that. Yeah, it's been a really long time since I've seen series 1. Even longer because we haven't actually gotten any of series 1 in this randomization
right
selection.
Right. I think it just would have been very different because the 10th Doctor is sort of the most like emotionally involved, sort of romantic, dashing figure out of all of the Doctors.
That's true.
And the Ninth Doctor very much isn't that. So I think you could tell a story that was very similar, but it would play very differently depending on who the actor was.
Yeah, I have a very difficult time imagining Christopher Eccleston riding a horse, breaking a mirror, and jumping through it into an 18th century France ballroom. I just can't picture that.
Well, that's only because he never got the chance.
I guess so. I long to see that though. Yeah, I guess I need to watch more Ninth Doctor, or I need to watch. I mean, like I've watched all of series 1, but it's been a very long time, as I keep saying, and I feel like I need to rewatch it because I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice. I have so many just vague memories of Christopher Eccleston. But yeah, that is weird to think that this episode could have featured him instead. I'm sure it would have been good.
Yeah, I think it probably would have been. I do like it with David Tennant in it, though. I mean,
Well,
I think this is one of Tennant's first really great performances. I think.
Yeah, because I mean, not that I remember. I guess it's actually been a long time since I've seen any else of series 2. But I mean, this is him being goofy and silly, and he is very emotionally invested in things, and he's I don't know, he's going all out here. He's just being really David Tennant. And I know we've talked about Stephen Moffat reusing ideas, but in this episode we get a sort of hint that Renette says, "Doctor Who, it's more than just a secret, isn't it?" And it's kind of an interesting. I mean, like, this is not. I'm not saying that Stephen Moffat was. I don't think he was imagining that the more was a litmus test that the Time Lords were going to use to figure out if this was the right universe for them to come back into. I don't think he was thinking that.
Well, no, because I mean, one thing, Moffat really hasn't, in the Matt Smith era, hasn't really touched the question of, why is the Doctor's name a secret?
Right, that's true.
It's something he touched on here with Doctor Who, It's More Than Just a Secret. Mm-hmm. And it's something he touched on in Forest of the Dead with River knowing the Doctor's name and saying it to him, and then the Doctor saying, how could you know that? There's only one time I could possibly say that.
Right.
So that all of that sort of develops this mystery of, why was the Doctor's name ever made a secret? What's the deal with that?
Right.
Whereas everything in the Matt Smith era about the Doctor's name has tended to be forward looking towards Trenzalore.
Right.
Even though it was a while before we heard the name Trenzalore, but most of the stuff we hear about the Doctor's name has to do with, that secret, it being, something that can never be told for reasons having to do with Trenzalore. And I think the place where we kind of end up on that is that his name is just the Doctor, and that's the only name that matters.
Right.
Which kind of goes against the grain of this episode and Forest of the Dead.
That's true. I never thought of that as like a separate kind of thing, but they are two very. I mean, like it doesn't logically fit together. Like those do really seem like separate ideas. That like it's like it's still based around the mystery of what the Doctor's name is, but it seems like the reason behind that are two very different things. Like or not even behind it, but I mean just the Doctor can't say his name because of Trenzalore or something. But that's not really like that's. I mean, obviously the Doctor doesn't know about Trenzalore now, so I mean he can't know that he's supposed to keep it a secret for that. There must be another secret. There must be. I mean that can't be the real reason why he doesn't use his name.
Yeah, it's not the original reason.
Right. So there's just multiple reasons. Maybe that's why the Time Lords picked it. Is because they figure the Doctor's already keeping his name a secret. Let's just make it an extra secret, and use it and piggyback off it, to make sure we're coming to the right universe.
I wonder if that's something that Moffat ever intends to revisit.
Well, yeah, because the thing is, either it's this really awesome idea that nobody's thought of yet, or it's too awesome. Like it's just the thing is like it's too. I mean, I love that this is a mystery. Like I think it's really cool that there's some reason why the Doctor can't ever say his name, and I think that that's cool. And I just don't think that there's any explanation that lives up to what it's been built up in my mind as.
What Moffat should do, I think, and what future showrunners should do is, find little ways to add to the mystery and then hand it off to the next person who's going to be in charge of Doctor Who. To have it be theirs to sort of add to and develop in ways that we hadn't expected. Because when Moffat said, there's only one time I could, I mean, that sort of adds a little something that it doesn't answer anything,
right?
But it adds to the mystery, and so I think that's probably how that should be treated. But I also feel like in the most recent few episodes, he's very much kind of said, it doesn't matter, that name doesn't matter. So based on that, I mean, I think it'd be kind of silly to turn around and all of a sudden have an arc in series 8 that focuses on the Doctor's name.
Yeah. I kind of feel like that's almost kind of the best direction to take it. Like if you're spending a lot of time saying like, oh yeah, there's this big mystery on the Doctor's name, the only way you can conclude that is by saying it doesn't matter. Like that's the only way you can come down from that. And then it seems silly to sort of go back and say, well, no, now it does matter again. That's a case of it getting too old. Like it's already kind of old. I mean, I don't need more of it. I like it here in that it's, obviously the big mystery of series 2 is, Torchwood and what that's about. So the idea of the Doctor's name here, this is just like a tiny little hint that, the Doctor's still this mysterious guy, but we're not focusing on him right now. We're focusing on this other arc, and that's, its own thing.
I think it works especially well here because this is, the Doctor's sort of becoming romantically involved in a very human way. Mm-hmm. That, and at the time this was very controversial. I mean, everything is always controversial in the Doctor Who fandom, but I mean the notion that the Doctor is becoming too sexual, too romantic, too humanized. So I think it's good to have sort of as a counterbalance. You have, all right, here he is, acting in a way that's sort of vulnerable and emotional, but you also have this sort of reminder of the central mystery that hasn't really been at the forefront of the show in New Who.
Right. Well, yeah, and how much was this really even a thing in Classic Who? I mean, like, was it ever really discussed that, like, what the Doctor's name was and stuff like that?
His name, not so much, but the very much towards the Seventh Doctor era, they were trying to develop a sense of mystery around the Doctor because there kind of hadn't been one ever since we found out he's a Time Lord from Gallifrey. Here are all the Time Lords. They hang out in this big place that looks like it might be an airport lounge. So there was a sense they tried to sort of enhance the mystery of the Doctor by implying there are parts of the Doctor's backstory that we don't understand, that are more mysterious than we realize, and it's just something very, very strange, and there are these sort of dark hints around Sylvester McCoy. In the new series, they kind of drop that a little bit because they're more interested in like the Time War.
Right.
So kind of what all of the mystery of the Doctor is now is they have sort of a whole big Time War mythology. So that's where the Doctor's mystery is. But here Moffat kind of reintroduces the sort of original, mysteriousness of the Doctor from the 60s, and that, we have no idea who this guy is, which they had kind of tried to carry through into the 80s with Sylvester McCoy.
That's interesting. Well, and, that's kind of funny that, like, there was this idea that there's, like, this kind of middle point where who the Doctor is kind of stops mattering, even though it's still the name of the show. Whereas in the beginning, it obviously is important, and then towards the Seventh Doctor, they try and make it important again. And I mean, I think that you kind of need. I feel like the show is at its best when it's asking what the mystery behind the Doctor is, but not really answering it.
Yeah, I think because I feel like the Doctor. I think the mystery behind the Doctor probably should never be like at the absolute focus of the story. Mm-hmm. It's always best when the Doctor is just some guy who arrives in the TARDIS and gets involved and tries to do the right thing. But it's good to have that kind of on the margin of the story as just sort of a constant reminder that we don't really know exactly what this guy's deal is, even though we've watched many hours of him, some more than others. But But yeah, so and I think that's how it's kind of working here in this episode, where it's just sort of there as a reminder.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of neat. Well, and it's funny because you see what the Doctor does, and you see him trying to fight all the bad guys and thwart their evil plans and whatnot. But you still don't really know much about his past and things like that. Like when you think in terms of like knowing a person, like you kind of know like what they've experienced in the past and stuff, and we don't really know about the Doctor. Like, we just know what he's like now. We don't know what he was like before he landed in 1963 Earth.
There's a line in this that's ripped off from a Paul Cornell novel.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, the line about the Doctor being the thing that monsters have nightmares about.
Ah, that was a good line.
It is.
It's
Moffat just went and ripped it off.
Well, and it's, yeah. That's too bad. That's really unfortunate because that's like I was thinking like, wow, that's a really good line. That's Stephen Moffat's right. That is what monsters would have nightmares about. And now I just feel lied to.
Well, I imagine he probably I don't know if he had permission or anything, but like he and Paul Cornell are friends. Like Moffat was the best man at Paul Cornell's wedding.
Well.
So I imagine that it was like a very sort of conscious attempt to sort of get in a reference, maybe more than a ripoff.
Okay. Well, I guess that's forgivable then.
It's from the novel Love and War.
I thought you were going to say Love and Monsters.
Nope.
Which wouldn't make any sense at all, because I wouldn't have guessed that Love and Monsters would be based off a novel. But anyway, Love and War.
Love and War.
So it involves, I'm guessing, love and also war. Does it also involve monsters?
Yes.
Oh, well, so it could have just as easily been called Love and Monsters.
I think so.
All right, I feel like I'm in the right here.
But the real monsters are people.
That's
the thing.
You might be onto something there.
Yeah, it's actually widely considered to be one of the best Doctor Who novels.
Oh.
I haven't gotten around to reading it, but Big Finish did an adaptation of it, and I listened to the adaptation.
Well, I think that counts for something.
I should hope so.
So when you say they did an adaptation, though, they did like a full cast of voice actors and stuff?
Yeah, they did a full cast adaptation of the novel, and they're actually doing more of those now. They're doing full cast adaptations of 90s Doctor Who novels now.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, to do that while all the characters who, would have been in the show are still alive and stuff and can record audio.
Yeah, and a lot of those books are out of print, almost all of them. So yeah, they're much more accessible through the medium of audio.
It's kind of weird to think that there are Doctor Who novels out of print. I mean, like not that it's like weird necessarily, but I mean it's just because there's so much of an effort made to have all of the episodes of Classic Who available. You'd kind of almost think that would extend to all Doctor Who media. But to think that these books could just go out of print, and I mean, obviously they're still there. Like, I mean, you can still bring them into print. I'm assuming that they keep the originals.
Yeah, well, they do reprints occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Like last year, they did a reprint of one novel for every Doctor. And so, obviously, for the newer Doctors, that's New Who novels.
Right.
But, for most of the classic Doctors, it's older novels from the 90s. And then this year they did a monster collection, which is like a themed collection where they reprinted one classic novel for various different monsters. Like they did a Silurian novel, a Sontaran novel, etc., etc. So they are doing some amount of bringing them back into print, but they don't have the rights to everything. I think in a lot of those cases, the rights were retained by the authors, and so they would have to go back and like renegotiate if they wanted to do a new edition or do ebooks and stuff like that. So that's the difference with the classic television serials. The BBC owns the rights to all that stuff.
Right.
And the rights for releasing that stuff commercially was already negotiated in advance decades ago, so they don't have to renegotiate anything.
So, that's interesting. I forget that not everything Doctor Who related is owned by the BBC.
Yeah, it's true. Some of those novels are like $80 on eBay.
Oh wow, that's a lot for a novel.
Yeah, for a paperback that probably went for like £5 when it was released. But oh well.
So yeah, if you ever get a time machine, you should go back to Great Britain in the early '90s and buy a bunch of these Doctor Who novels. Get a good return on investment.
Yeah, I've been trying to start amassing a collection of the new adventures, the Seventh Doctor novels that came out in the '90s after the show was canceled, and that sort of carried the story forward from that point. And I've got the first like 10 or 11, but there's a lot.
Well, they did have several years.
Yep.
Does that carry forward with the Cartmel master plan?
It does. In fact.
So wait, do we know the entirety of the Cartmel master plan?
Well, there wasn't really a Cartmel master plan. It's not like an actual plan.
That's what he wants you to believe.
The general idea is that Sylvester McCoy and the script editor Andrew Cartmel kind of got to chatting about the character and the direction, and they had a general agreement that they could do more with like establishing the mystery of the Doctor. And so a couple of weird hints were thrown in, and there were some vague ideas about what would end up happening. And some of those ideas were sort of, paid off in the novels, including like one of them is that the Seventh Doctor has this sort of manipulative tendency, and Love and War actually is the novel where that sort of gets to be too much for Ace, and so there's this big conflict between them that ends up in her leaving the Doctor because she just can't take it anymore. But there's a lot of stuff happens in the novel involving Gallifrey, and then not in the novels in general, not that particular novel, but a lot of stuff happens in the novels involving Gallifrey, particularly in one of the last ones called Lung Barrow, which introduced all kinds of weird stuff about the Doctor's backstory, and including looms. It introduced the looms.
I have a vague sense of what these looms are.
The idea is that Time Lords aren't born; they're woven in looms, from which they emerge as fully grown adults. All of which is kind of contradicted by the new series, but
right.
No one really cares.
Right, and nor should they. I don't know. That's kind of a strange idea. I mean, it's certainly interesting. It kind of makes sense, I want to say. Like I don't know how much sense it actually makes, but it's when you think about it, the Doctor regenerates as an adult, and the age varies, but he's usually Time Lords in general when they regenerate. They regenerate into adults of varying ages, but they're never like kids again. So you never necessarily see a Time Lord kid. Like I mean,
we have now though.
Well, yeah, obviously.
We've now seen the Master as a child, and we've seen, all of the children of Gallifrey that the Doctor had to count.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, it's been established now. That's kind of weird that, like, I guess, is it kind of like a range? Like, if you're regenerating or whatever, you look anywhere between 30 years younger and 30 years older.
I don't know.
So like, what would kids be like? It would really suck if a kid got injured or something, and then he like regenerated back to a baby.
Well, we see the young Melody Pond.
Oh, that's true.
Regenerate, but we don't see quite what she regenerates into. Although we do know that she turns up in Ledworth as a little girl. So.
So yeah, that could. That would be very strange. But of course, is she technically?
She's a human.
Yeah, she's not technically a Time Lord, so
no.
Although she does regenerate like one, so
she does it that.
I think we have to assume that the regeneration rules are the same for her than they are for Time Lords. I don't know if I really buy the idea, and I guess it kind of makes sense that in the future, fire extinguishers are going to be ice guns, and probably vice versa. Because I don't know. Is that really an effective mean? Like if I just spray liquid nitrogen on a fire, is that gonna put out the fire? Is that gonna work?
I don't know. Because I've never tried.
Well, yeah, and maybe we should. I guess. Fires do need oxygen, and if we're pouring nitrogen on them, nitrogen is not oxygen.
No, by no means.
So, because obviously, okay, here's a hot thing, it's burning. We put something cold on it, it'll go away. But that's not necessarily the action involved. I mean, because just a fire can exist in a cold environment. That's like cold doesn't stop fire from being a thing.
Right.
But it could possibly be that the chemical compound of liquid nitrogen would be enough to suppress the oxygen of the fire. I don't know.
Could be. I don't know. I've never actually used a fire extinguisher.
Nor have I.
Not that really has anything to do with anything. I was just musing that I haven't.
Yeah, for all I know, maybe fire extinguishers do use liquid nitrogen. I've never seen one happen. So.
I don't know what's in a fire extinguisher. Do you?
Well, I've always understood it to be some kind of, flame retardant foam. Like it actually like can't be burned, and so it like sort of snuffs out the fire by sort of hugging it to death. I envision fire suppressing foam as being just a kind of a hug.
It's a death hug for fire. Death hug for fire.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it just seems to me like that's a good system, and I don't know why they'd feel the need to improve upon that. But it's the future.
Yeah, well, it is the future. It could be that it's not something that they come up with from like the perspective of taking fire extinguishers as we know them and then trying to improve upon them. It could be a completely unrelated technology that was eventually found to also happen to work as a fire extinguisher. So eventually they just got rid of fire extinguishers so that they could save on fuel for not having to save the weight.
Yeah, that could be. Or maybe in the future they lose the knowledge of fire extinguishers, like how in modern day times we can't duplicate the exact same technique for dyeing clothes purple as they had in ancient times, where it was where purple clothing was like a super rare thing. Like maybe and that was since lost because it was something the ancient Greeks did or whatever, or maybe not Greeks, whoever.
Phoenicians, I think.
Yeah, them. So maybe it's like that. Maybe sometime between now and whatever 3,000 years in the future, they lose the recipe for fire extinguishers, and so they have to completely invent new ones.
It's just completely lost. It gets marked as spam.
Yeah. Well, and that would be how you would do it, because I definitely mark things as spam and then they go away forever.
We think that we're so good at keeping records that all of this information we have now will be available to the future. But the problem isn't so much that it would be lost or destroyed in the sense of no longer existing. It would just all be marked as spam. That's the real information loss danger of the future.
Yeah, and I think that is going to be a real problem someday. Someone's going to send an email to someone else, be like, "Hey, this is the only existing recipe for fire extinguishers. Guard this with your life." And then the recipient is just going to mark it as spam because I think it's going to be for Viagra or something.
Or someone will try to send a virus and attach it to a random corpus of text that includes information about fire extinguishers. As a result, some sophisticated anti-malware software will see that and begin to understand that anything pertaining to a fire extinguisher is spam and should be mistrusted. And so all of that information will be quarantined. And so it'll be there if anyone were ever to go looking for it, but no one will even know that there was ever such a thing as a fire extinguisher.
That's right.
So they'll think they have to invent this nitrogen thing.
Yeah, I think that's got to be it. It'll just be lost to time.
Mm-hmm.
A fire extinguisher lost to time.
All right. So, Lewis, shall we now randomly select the story that we will be watching after The Girl in the Fireplace?
I think we shall.
All right, the random selector is being primed. It's being readied for random selection. And it's School Reunion.
Really?
Which means a mulligan, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Especially because that's the one right before The Girl in the Fireplace. We can't be having that.
No, we can't.
No.
That's not allowed.
All right. Random selector has led us astray. But this time I know it'll see us through to a bright and shining future. in which we will watch The Mark of the Rani.
Ooh.
The other Rani story. The first Rani story, actually. I prefer to think of Time and the Rani as the other Rani story. This is the primary one.
Yes. Yeah, that's neat because this will be the first time, if I'm not mistaken, that we will be watching a Sixth Doctor story. Like actually watching.
In this randomizer, yeah.
Yes, yeah, well, yes.
Yeah. I mean, there was the audio Davros that was listened to, but this is to be viewed.
Yes, with our eyes.
And our ears, though. Our ears will once again come into play.
Yes, they are important. Unless, you turn on subtitles and then they're kind of ambiguous or superfluous.
Oh, I don't know. I mean...
Well, and I'm not saying that there's not some benefit to be had.
Yeah, they're still well worth using.
Yeah, I would recommend it if at all possible.